Hey guys, Mrs. Carraz here. Today we're looking at Chapter 5, Section 2, Colonists Resist Tighter Control. And it's a long one, so brace yourselves. Alright, so some of this is covering information that we've already touched in class, right? We talked about some problems that followed the French and Indian War, and now we're looking at them a little bit more in depth, and we want to see how those problems are solved, air quote. So let's start with Pontiac's War. After the French and Indian War ended, conflict arose between British settlers and Native Americans. Pontiac, who was the leader of the Ottawa Nation, formed an alliance with other Native American groups and started a war against the British colonists in order to protect Native American lands. Remember, the French had a better relationship with Native Americans than the British did, so when the French have to cede all their land to the British, that makes the Native Americans scared. They know that the British will not be so friendly, they will not play so nice. So Pontiac's War begins. And both sides do some damage during this war. So Native Americans attack British forts and settlements, and in the process they destroy at least 6 British forts completely, annihilate them. They also killed over 2,000 backcountry settlers. And remember that backcountry is that border of what is settled and what is unsettled on the frontier. By the British, well, unsurprisingly, they killed a lot of Native Americans, even from tribes that had not attacked them, which obviously doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, though, the British did win. They defeated Pontiac and the nations that were fighting alongside him. But that's only a temporary solution to our problems, right? Because we've discussed that this western land is problematic for settlers to take because more conflicts with Native Americans could be in our future. So the British issue the Proclamation of 1763. And this is passed in order to avoid further conflict between settlers and Native Americans. The British don't want it happening anymore. They don't want to deal with it. The Proclamation of 1763 declares that colonists could not live west of the Appalachian Mountains. That land is reserved for Native Americans. Colonists should have nothing to do with it. And this makes colonists really angry, right? They fought the French in the Indian War. They helped the British win this land. Why can't they live on it, right? They thought they should be able to live wherever they wanted. So colonists are not so pleased with the Proclamation of 1763. So another thing that will be problematic, right? We saw this issue of debt, right? So colonists expected that after the French and Indian War, their taxes would go up a little, but not too much because they played such a big role in fighting the French and Indian War. They made so many contributions. They helped the British win. Therefore, they're not going to be punished by having money taken out of their pockets for taxes. That's the colonist perspective. But the British have another perspective because the French and Indian War put Britain in debt. It was very expensive to fight. And now, following the war, the British have sent troops over to the colonies trying to keep the people living here safe. And again, that's another expense. And the British think that they should raise the taxes on the colonists in order to help pay off these expenses. The thinking on the British end, right, is if, hey, I spent a lot of money trying to protect you and take care of you, you can help me pay it back. So we're seeing a difference of opinion, and the British can do what they want, right? They're in charge at this time. The colonists don't have to be happy with it, though, and we're going to see that they're not. So the first tax we're going to examine today is the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act was passed in 1764, and it placed a duty, which is another word for an import tax, on several products like sugar and molasses. The Sugar Act also made a harsher punishment for smugglers, and smugglers are people who try to, bring something illegally into a country without paying taxes or without playing by the government's rules. I, for instance, will go and buy candy at Duane Reade for $1 and smuggle it into the movie theater instead of buying a $7 candy bar there. That's technically an act of smuggling. Don't tell the cops. So this meant that colonists had to pay more money for the goods that they needed, right? They couldn't just buy things from smugglers because smugglers were being punished more. It means that colonists have to pay the tax, and they don't like the tax. The tax is taking money out of their own pockets. Another law passed at this time that isn't so friendly is the Quartering Act. And when we're thinking quartering in these terms, think about like people with fancy mansions are like, well, the maid's quarters are over there, right? Quartering has to do with living area, living space. So backtracking a few slides, right? The Proclamation of 1763 said settlers can't live on land that's reserved for Native Americans. But who's going to stop them, right? We need someone that will enforce this law. So the British decide that they need troops that will live in the colonies and enforce British laws here. The Quartering Act is supposed to support that idea. And the Quartering Act declares that colonists must take in British soldiers. So if you are a colonist, a British soldier could come, knock on your door. You have to give them a place to live, a bed to sleep on. You need to feed them their meals, and you need to make sure they have what they need, whether it's a face towel or soap or what have you, okay? Colonists are not happy with this. They feel like this is a violation of their rights to have a stranger, right, even though it's a stranger sanctioned by the government, walking into their homes. So colonists, not a huge fan of the Quartering Act. Oh, another act. I wonder if colonists will feel favorably about this. I doubt it. So this is the Stamp Act. It was passed in 1765, and it required that colonists purchase special tax stamps in order to buy products like newspapers, wills, licenses, contracts, basically anything that is pretty commonly used and is most often printed on paper or something like paper. And the colonists hate this. You might think, right, it's a small tax. Okay, how much could the tax be on a newspaper? Well, let's say it's a penny. And let's say on a contract is a penny, right? If you are a lawyer who has to read the papers every day and signs contracts every day and draws up wills, those pennies are going to add up really, really quick. And now you're losing a lot of money to taxes. So the colonists really are not happy with this act. They respond in many negative ways. So there are protests organized by civilians who are just ordinary townspeople, right? As well as political groups like the House of Burgesses, right? Entire lawmaking bodies would protest the Stamp Act because their work is being affected by it, right? There were boycotts or refusals to buy certain products, and the products in questions here were British goods, right? If the British is trying to take money out of our pockets with taxes, well, guess what? We'll take money out of yours by not buying what you're selling. And furthermore, there were petitions or written requests to the government calling for an end to the Stamp Act. All right, but we get somewhat of a win-lose situation here. In 1766, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, or basically took it back, erased it, made it like it didn't exist. It's no longer a law. Because people were so vocally against it, it didn't make sense to have this law in place. But also, and I love this one, in 1766, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act. And here's what the Declaratory Act said. Parliament has total control over the colonies. Period. That's it. So basically, they took away the Stamp Act and then issued the Declaratory Act, which is saying, like, we didn't do it because you told us to. We're the bosses, just so you know. A little much in my taste, but what can you do? So following the repeal of the Stamp Act, we have the Townshend Acts being put in place. And Charles Townshend was in charge of the British Treasury, right? The Treasury is where our money is stored. So he obviously wants to put more money in the pockets of the British government. So Townshend passes the Townshend Acts, which say that, A, Britain will not tax products or activities inside the colonies, right? So if you're growing your own wheat, if wheat is grown in Pennsylvania and someone from Georgia wants to buy it, there's no tax, right? It was grown within the colonies. But products that are imported into the colonies from the outside, those are going to be taxed. And that, to Townshend, seems like a fair way to help Britain pay back its debt. Now, again, in order to enforce these Townshend Acts, we need some system in place, right? Who's going to stop people from smuggling goods, right? People need to do things legally and pay their taxes and move forward. So, in order to enforce the Townshend Acts, Britain allowed officers to use writs of assistance. And writs of assistance are court orders that allow officials to make searches without saying what they're looking for, right? And colonists felt like this was a disturbing violation of their rights. If you think about writs of assistance, it's similar to how we might think of like a search warrant today. But today, if the police get a search warrant, it needs to specifically say what they're looking for and why. And there need to be specific reasons before a judge is going to approve that warrant. Writs of assistance give the police to search you or give British officials the permission to search you without saying what they're looking for. So I could accuse somebody of smuggling sugar, and then I find a whole bunch of smuggled tea on them and say, yes, haha, I caught you. I knew you were doing that, when that isn't even what I was looking for in the first place. It's complicated. We'll talk about it more in class. All right, so writs of assistance weren't the only problematic part of the Townshend Acts, or problematic thing relating to Charles Townshend, I should say. So Charles Townshend also had a problem with colonial assemblies like the House of Burgesses and the General Court. He thought that if we give these local legislatures power, it undermines the British power, right? So when the New York Assembly tried to resist the Quartering Act, British officials said, hey, New York Assembly, you've got no say. You've got no power. We are in charge. Don't you remember the Declaratory Act? And obviously this makes colonists super angry. And again, they feel like the best way to act on this anger is to hit Britain in its pocket by beginning to boycott or refuse to buy British goods. All right, so on March 5th, 1770, all of the Townshend Acts were repealed except for the tax on tea. And that tea issue, well, we'll come back to it. So the same day that the Townshend Acts were repealed, citizens in Boston were jeering at a bunch of British soldiers. The soldiers are feeling pretty threatened, and because they feel threatened, they start shooting into the crowd. At this point, 5 people are killed while 6 others are injured. And this becomes known as a massacre because many people died, and it was armed men attacking unarmed citizens, although we'll look into that a bit more in class. So Crispus Attucks was an African-American sailor who was involved in this. He was the first person to die in the Boston Massacre, and he now has the reputation as being the first person to die in the name of American independence. He was acting against British soldiers attacked. All of a sudden, a movement is forming here. Moving on to Mr. John Adams. So John Adams was a Massachusetts lawyer who actually defended the soldiers from the Boston Massacre. And he supported colonial rights. He thought that the colonies had rights that Britain was not properly protecting. But he also believed that every person has the right to a lawyer and a fair trial, right? So if these soldiers need to be defended, why wouldn't John Adams step up and defend them? He does. Of all the soldiers that were involved with this, only 2 were found guilty, and their punishment for killing 5 people was to have their thumbs branded. So take that. All right, I believe this is the last one for today. It is indeed. So after the Boston Massacre, Samuel Adams establishes the Committee of Correspondence. And this committee is designed to keep colonists in communication with each other. It had to keep them informed of British activities, and they also, members of the committee, wrote letters and pamphlets in order to unite colonists in opposition to British actions. Basically, the Boston Massacre has shown colonists what the British are capable of, and we do not want to suffer at the hands of the British. We want to play it smart. We don't want to listen to their rules. We don't want them to hurt us violently. We want to stay informed about what's going on. We're not a revolution yet. We're not there yet. But people are realizing that they need to pay attention to what's going on around them. And that is where we are going to freeze for today. Have a great afternoon, guys.